We don't want anyone, yeah.
Okay, welcome everyone today. Thank you for joining us to the Q&A session for Decolonizing Cultural Spaces, the Living Cultures Project. This is a full-length documentary produced by InsightShare, made by Zoe Broughton, coordinated by InsightShare, Otoilo, Lama, and Oxford University Pitt Rivers Museum, in partnership with the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in Cambridge. For those of you who haven't had a chance yet to see the documentary, it will be available for the rest of the day and into tomorrow at several different websites, which I'll share with you later on. The documentary follows a delegation of 7 Maasai representatives from Tanzania and Kenya who spent 2 weeks in the UK working alongside British museums to decolonize cultural spaces by making them aware of their colonial history and how this can be addressed responsibly. InsightShare would like to thank its funding partners, the Staples Trust, the Network for Social Change, and the Bertha Foundation. I would also like to remind everyone who's joining us today that there is a call to action to please donate to PALCA. That is the Pan-African Living Cultures Alliance at insightshare.org/donate. I'm very pleased to say that today we have Maasai Delegates who were featured in the film to speak to you today in this Q&A, in addition to representatives from InsightShare and the Pitt Rivers Museum. So first and foremost, I'd like to introduce the Maasai Delegates. I would like to start by introducing Samwel, if you can wave to everyone there so they can see you. Samwel is a socio-environmental scientist and long-term human rights defender. He is a leader of the Ngurasambo Community Forest Trust. Please correct that later for me. And is the founding director of Otoilo Lama, a participatory video group that documents human rights issues, social development, and Maasai culture. Next up, I would like to introduce Amos on the call. He is a teacher and longtime activist in cultural leadership practices and a founding member of the Pan-African Living Cultures Alliance. He is a young member of the Leuka Council of Elders and a member of the Land Committee in Leuka. Next, I'd like to introduce Schola. She is a women's rights community activist in Kenya who uses participatory video to promote women's economic independence within her Maasai community. She supports traditional beadwork and has established an organization, Alma Makes, that sells Maasai-made beadwork and pours the profits back into women's initiatives. I'd also like to introduce Evelyn. She is from the Ilparakuyo Maasai community. She has worked to support community development since 2010, addressing the challenges that hinder sustainable livestock production. In her work, Evelyn is focused on community history and post-colonial relations. Next up, I would like to introduce from InsightShare, Nick Lunch. He is a co-founder of InsightShare with his brother, Chris. Nick has 30 years experience as a community activist and is recognized as a pioneer of participatory video methods. And from the Pitt Rivers Museum, we have Laura. She holds a professional fellowship at Linacre College and is associated with the School of Anthropology and Museum Ethnography at Oxford. Previously, she led the curatorial department of the National Museum of World Cultures. All of these bios are available for you to read and look more into onto the website, but there's so much ground to cover. I'd like to hop into our conversation. I should, of course, introduce myself. My name is Adrian, and I'm the creative director of the Bertha Foundation, who are proud to have had a part to play in supporting this documentary and the work of InsightShare. So first and foremost, to give you a little schedule for what we're going to look at today, we are going to be looking at the past and the present in terms of the living cultures that are explored in the documentary, and we'll also be having a look at the future as well. To get started, I'd like to invite Schola and Amos both to talk about the Iunuto ceremony. and to discuss the opening scene of the film, where the Maasai tribal communities from Tanzania and Kenya came together for important coming of age ceremony. Are you able to speak to that? And then we'd like to show a clip.
Oh, my name is Amos Leuka. As Adrian said, the first part of the film is the Unoto ceremony. The Unoto ceremony is where the young Morans from both Kenya and Tanzania come together to graduate and become junior elders. In that ceremony, that is where the spiritual leader oversees the whole process. And that's where the young Morans are given guidance on how to take responsibility as junior elders in the community. The whole community have to witness the process, but it's being guided by the members, who are the ones who have brought those young Morans throughout the ceremony, which is called Endipara ceremony. So a Unoto ceremony is when they are completing the graduation ceremony to become junior elders, and it's presided by the Lebon, who is the spiritual leader of all the Maasai. I can give scholar maybe 2 ads on the role of women in that particular ceremony.
Yeah, I can add about a Unoto ceremony. There are some processes that it said go through. Like in the beginning, they make a home that is a big manyatta, whereby the Kenya group move to it and stay maybe for about some months or a year or beyond, depending on the time that people are in. Like maybe it is raining or maybe it is a dry season. From there, they participate in some rituals whereby the Lebon give the directions, whereby the elders of that age set will guide them to go through. And from there, they move to a new home with the help of the Lebon, as we have been told there before. And from there, they use white cows, whereby they believe that the white cows will prevent anything that is any witchcraft that can be done not to prevail. From there, they burn everything behind, making it to go on fire completely to make sure that nothing is left behind. And they have some other practices that they go and participate there in the new home. And from there, they receive their final blessings from the elders of the group, directed by the Lebon. And from there, now they move to their homes. But before they move to their homes, they are shaped. About 40 of them, or 39, are shaped. And then the other one are released to go and do the same thing at home. And now from there, they become young elders.
Are we able to show a clip from that ceremony?
Yeah.
Oh, that's the wrong one, actually. That one's the one we were going to show a bit later. That's the one, yeah.
Rahayolo Shalamangai. Another Maasai. Merella Shangai, Yogumongo Longish, Shalanga, Ration Romono, Ration Mother Vision, Rashan Romono.
What's so striking about the film and why it's so relevant is that living cultures is in the title, is the fact that these, more than artifacts, it's seen that these are living parts of your culture. And that was a striking quote, that this is, that you're actually in holding these artifacts, the museums are actually holding the communities and holding these terrible histories. Are you able to, can you just expand upon that a little bit about how, about the timeline of these ceremonies, the fact that this is actually, this coming of age, it's a lifetime to actually earn these, well, they're calling them artifacts, but the real relevance of those to all of you as Maasai. I'll direct that to Amos again and Scala.
Yeah, as I said in the beginning, this ceremony is directed by the elders. And in our community, there is what we call transfer of knowledge and wisdom from one generation to the other. During this ceremony, this is where the connection and the knowledge is being transferred. And all that accumulated wisdom is transferred from the elders to the young morals. Those are the people who take responsibility in ensuring that the community is guarded. All that belongs to the community is taken care of. So in generally, the ceremony is a transition process, which also give transfer knowledge to be given to the rightful owner. And it's also a belonging point. In the exit system, that's where we belong. For example, myself and Samwel, we belong to the same age group. And it will be natural, it's a lifetime. There, we take that for life. And there come a time we are given such responsibility to mentor the age. And also transfer the same wisdom which we have accumulated to the next group. There are a lot of artifacts where we use during that particular ceremony. And we found them in the museum. I can give an example of Qatar, which I have it myself, but it is found in the museum. So in real sense, the Living Culture Project is showing that what the museum is holding in wardrobe is living in ourselves. So that's what I can add as far as the ceremony is concerned.
Yeah, also concerning the artifacts that are used in the ceremony, we have some artifacts like, let's say the things that they are using to make the fire stick and the other thing. Like when we were in the museum the other time, we found it there, which is also very sensitive because the new home, when they move from when they begin a new home for the generation, they have to make a fire. That is now that begins the new generation. They need that stick to make the fire to start the lighting. They cannot make any other fire until they have those sticks.
So that disconnect is very strong when these things are removed from the culture that they're in. In speaking of the fire stick, can one of you speak to the fire making ceremony? I believe it was Amos, you were speaking at Pitt Rivers Museum about this and the importance of indigenous peoples and the Maasai in these cases telling their own stories.
Yeah, I speak in the Pitt Rivers Museum about having incorrect information or giving something correct about ourselves. And I reiterate the same point that what is being given is not true or is not, a lot is missing. For example, in reference to the fire stick, in the museum they just say a fire stick. But for us, it holds a lot of connection. The fire which is made in the middle of the manyata, which is a boma, just to let, for those who don't know, the manyata is a big boma surrounded by huts, and the fire is made in the middle. That fire is taken by every mother who is in that manyata. That sea is a connection, and the Loibon blaze that fire before it is taken to every bone. And that fire will remain in that manyata for until it moves. Also, in our community, the Olpiron, which is also the other stick, is what we use to name the age group. For those people who rekindle the fire for us, it is what is used to tell more about the age group that is of coming of age. So it is what will now give those people a name, Olpiron. You take that, and that's where you say, that's where you belong. But that one is not told in the museum. So when I put that reference, it is good if the museum will respect those artifacts and found the true story from the owner, so that they can give the right story even to the children who are coming to those museums. And I think it will add value to what they are doing if this word can be told clearly and correctly. And the right people to say so is the people where the artifact comes from.
I think this is a good opportunity to ask you, Evelyn, about women's involvement in the objects that are crafted and made in the Maasai community. I believe you spoke about this in the film. Could you tell us a bit about that? Hi, Evelyn. I'm not sure if you can hear me at the moment. I was asking about the women's involvement in the role of crafting many cultural artifacts. Or it doesn't seem like she's able to hear me at the moment. So Scholar, might you be able to speak to that?
Again, pardon?
I asked if you would be able to speak to the role that women play in the crafting of the artifacts that are both seen in your living culture and seen in the museum, and beyond that, how it felt for you when you saw them in the UK museums.
Yeah, most of the artifacts, mostly those that are made by the beads, are made by women. And I can say that almost all the artifacts or the beading that we do in our community, almost all of them, most of them have the purpose, the real purpose that the real meaning in the community. But sometimes we have some that we use for decoration. But like in the museum, the 5 artifacts that we found in the first place, the most sensitive ones, almost all of them were made by women. Like now, let's say, for example, Isekera, because those are some of the things that we found there. Ankononkoi, Emonyorit, those are some of the things that we found in the museum, which are really very sensitive and means a lot in the livelihood of a woman in our culture. Because let us take, for example, Emonyorit, a woman cannot be married without it. If you are married, you must put it on so that you can be seen that you are married to that person. You must put it on the neck or in the ear to show it as a sign of that you are married. And also, Isekira, that shows that a girl has graduated from childhood to womanhood through some processes which are passed through by a young girl to a woman. So that is the last stage that she passed. When she removed that Isekira from the forehead, the mother put it on until the time that she will dismantle them to use it as a necklace. It is not supposed to be shared by somebody else or used by somebody else. It's just the mother or the daughters, the sisters to that girl. So all of the artifacts that at least we have seen in the museum, most of them are passed through the hands of a woman to be there.
Thank you. I'd like to direct a question to Samwel about the role of participatory video in uncovering some of these truths and giving you your own voice in this process. Can you talk a little bit about your journey with participatory video to making this film itself?
Thank you very much, Adrian. This is another privilege opportunity to talk about the participatory video and maybe the journey we have gone through. And in my biography, I am a long-term human rights activist. We have worked with very serious work on land rights and human rights in northern Tanzania. And what comes to me, the first time I realized that we need to work on our own is the time that the government banned all the mainstream media from coming to Loliondo to document the struggles of Maasai in land rights. And we said, okay, this is the time we are now locked up. We cannot communicate anything from what is happening in Loliondo. And this is actually where we got in touch with InsightShare, and we realized that we could actually be doing these things on our own. This is a process which is actually involve a lot of steps before a film is made. And the most important thing is the ownership, community warning, and having that opportunity to do their own filming, to agree on what's to be filmed. And also talk about how do you use the film or the video. It comes out of the process. So for us, if it were not for PV, we would have been able to come to this far, because this is how we started documenting the Loliondo land rights, establishing our video collective, and also telling people the stories from the Maasai language, not necessarily translation. And people have been able to address and discuss issues from their own localities. And it is all about building capacity of indigenous people or even communities, local communities, to be able to use the videos and to be able to use videos to stimulate discussion locally, and also share what is appropriate to be shared with outside audiences. So for this case, with the partnership we have with InsightShare and now with Pitt Rivers Museum and many others, participatory video has actually been the bridge that enabled us to link with other people. And it was not Samwel or Amos or somebody else. It was actually the voices of the people who made the voices that made this project very important and encouraged people to come along with us in our struggle in this process. So just to say, this is a process where people agree on what to be filmed, they do it, they edit, and they agree on how to use it, and build consensus and agreement within the community themselves, and share what is to be shared, and put also all the wisdoms in the video that is to be used locally. But another important thing about the PV is it is giving people opportunity of different segments: children, women, youth, elders. Everyone has an opportunity to participate. Everyone can be a filmmaker. And in our films or in our videos that we have been able to make, you could see these segments of community actually participating equally. And in our video collective in Tanzania, for instance, we have women, we have men, we have elders, we have youth, an opportunity that is normally not very clear in this community. So I think PV has brought us into a very important step in terms of communicating our issues, but also discussing internally and taking steps and taking actions on what is to be done, which is within the community capacity.
At the end of the film, where the film left off, was the delegation going back to figure out what the next steps are. And I can see already people are asking that in the questions. And I know we've got a clip that's coming up next. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to go back to the spiritual leader and what those consultations were? And then we'll play the clip that you brought back.
Yeah, after my visit in 2017 to Pitt Rivers Museum, I went back and we made a film of elders after I told them about the artifacts that are in the museum. And we sent the film or the video to the Pitt River director, who was very much in support of what the elders were talking about, because the elders actually said, no, this is, we have to know more about the artifacts, how they got into museums, who took them, and what is being used for. And after that, our second trip, that was 2018, we had an opportunity to go back and now involve the Maasai community of both Tanzania and Kenya. So our feedback session, actually, which is part of the videos that we've been able to send, was about building that understanding and also connecting the Maasai traditional leadership and spiritual leader and youth and everybody on the part of the culture that is actually in museums. And this is the first time that the Maasai actually learned and get to know that their artifacts, their cultural significant artifacts are in museums. And it built a lot of wish to understand and know more about it. And this is why they decided that this process, because this is very sensitive, has to be led by a spiritual leader. And this is how Makombo came into being. And as a leader who has the powers to foretell, but also to tell about the history, and who is respected in the community, and who can actually engage our ancestors who are not with us now. So this is how the whole thing came into being, and now we have Lema in Kenya, also a scholar, and Amos and others who are working to make sure that we bring the community together in terms of taking forward issues around the cultural artifacts that are found in the museum.
Can we play that clip now, Zach, of the spiritual leader Makombo speaking? I'd like to invite Laura and Evelyn to to speak, if you can, about the conversation about reconciliation that you had in an interview with The Economist that connects to this.
Yes, I could say a little bit about sort of how that sort of came to be. So part of the outcome, obviously, of the first visit when Sam came in 2017 was that he went to several of the elders and asked about, and told them that there were these objects which he mentioned earlier. And then several of the elders indicated that they were quite annoyed that objects were here in the UK because that they were taken without permission. But also when the first delegation came that Scholar and Samwel were part of, they indicated there were 5 objects that were especially problematic because they were objects of inheritance and objects that were sacred, which people could see in the film. But then also in the 2020 delegation, when Lomaron came and he saw how the families have been affected and how they have been taken from the families. He already mentioned when we were going through the museum that maybe one of the things that might be done, which is a very well-established way of reconciliation in Maasai community, is to do a ceremony. And when we were talking to The Economist, Amos and Sam and Evelyn were all in a pub having that conversation because on a Sunday during a horrible storm, we even had to close the museum because of the storm. So we were sitting in a pub and Amos and Sam had explained the ceremony, and then Evelyn actually went into a lot more detail after the interview and talked more about how exactly a ceremony would take place and what it might involve for us. And so maybe Evelyn, I don't know if you remember that conversation, but if you could say a little bit more about what you explained at the time.
Evelyn, are you there? Can you hear us? I think there's a slight delay. Evelyn, your mic is on. We can't hear you. If you can hear us, would you like the question repeated? Laura, can you repeat that again, please?
I was wondering whether you can say something more about the ceremony, the reconciliation ceremony, where families are brought together and there's a number of cows that have to be paid as part of the reconciliation between 2 different families. When, for example, in Maasai community, reconciliation is sought between families. I mean, Sam and Amos also know about this, but I remember that you were quite specific about what would be necessary.
Well, perhaps Sam can speak to that.
Yeah, yeah. This is it is called in my language. It is called Ngiro's reconciliation process. If you happen to accidentally kill or even intentionally kill in the Maasai community, we don't revenge. What we do is we believe in reconciliation, healing, and relationship building. So when we were discussing with elders about these artifacts, which in our case, given the time and given the way the Maasai value these objects, because they are part and parcel of our processes, rite of passage, it is very likely that most of the people who happen to have owned, who are the owners of the artifacts, must have been reckoned as some circumstances that are not either sold or even given. So when you kill a person, the Maasai community, the traditional leaders, and the spiritual leader guides the process of reconciliation, healing, and relationship building. It is called Ngero, and it is one of the few ceremonies that we do because the community doesn't encourage killing. But when it happened, then the elders and the traditional leaders guide a process where 49 cows are paid, and they're not paid to the family of the deceased, but actually they are paid. They say life has no value, but what they do is those cows will be given to a clan whose the family belongs to, and then the clan can decide on how they will be actually divided into poor people. But actually the sense of it is establishing a relationship and showing that the other clan that happened to have killed is feeling responsible. And it is actually the day that two families will be meeting. And it has to be done where they have to cross the river, like crossing the river and leaving the bad things behind the river. And also a new relationship is established, and people will forgive, will forget, and life continues. So this is, I happen to have attended one in my lifetime. It is also where people actually tend to regret for bad things. People cries, and they show that we don't pay bad things for bad things, but we have to always seek for peace, seek for relationship, because they are there to actually relationship. You start a relationship, and then when you go, you leave it behind, and people can keep on with the relationship that you have established. So this is a ceremony. You have to pay 49 cows, and actually it has to be contributed, not the person who killed, who gives all the cows. It's the clan that contributes. Maybe you can give 2 or 1 cow, and then the other 40 cows, 48 can be contributed by the clan. So it's a shared responsibility across the 2 clans, and the other clans becomes the witness and facilitating the relationship.
That's fascinating. The shared responsibility is definitely a different value system than what we might experience in the West or in capitalist systems. I mean, this is a great opportunity, Sam, while you're speaking, to talk a little bit about different knowledge systems. When we talk about these ceremonies, there's also different ways of knowing. I wanted to know a bit more about the sacred gourd, for example, and because we saw that process happening about how information was gained from ancestors and how you're able to map it out over the information the museum already had from the limited information from collectors.
Yeah, you put it very correctly. This is, we are actually a community, a living community. When you talk about the Maasai community, we are referring the sharing, we are referring the unity, the fabric that unites us together as a community. And all the information that we had to inquire from the Libon about the artifacts that are in the museum actually tells us much about the connection and the way our culture is resilient. And given that the fact that it has been a long time, but the elders were telling us that the artifacts were actually breathing. They are in the museums. They're regarded as very old, but they are never old. They are always alive and has a lot of significances in terms of how we are related, how we go through processes that keep us together as a community. So the information we happen to get from the artifacts is little, what was recorded, but what we managed to learn from the elders is actually very, very big.
Well, that's great. Are we able to play a clip now about participatory video, Zach? Participatory video as a revolutionary tool.
I could say I'm one of the first indigenous activists to discover or maybe to use a participatory video as an approach. Basically, what pushed me to go to that is all issues around misrepresentation. There's been a lot of fake news. There's been a lot of, intentional narratives around what we do as indigenous people. there's been a lot of media coverages that not really take into account the relationship we have with our natural resources. They've been talking on land as a standalone, talking about culture as a bad thing, talking about the systems as old and backward, you know. So for the last 5 years now that we've been using PV as an approach, we have been able to register a lot of success. One is we've been able to tell a story from our perspective. And the stories we make, the stories we document, it's also been able to go through several levels, and we've been able to engage up to United Nations. Secondly, we've also been able to build internal solidarity on issues because we do screening in the communities, and communities that stimulate discussion, internal discussion on how we can tackle issues from within the community. And thirdly is that the participatory video has also been able to build that capacity. We've trained people to be able to use the cameras. We have a pool, we have the Maasai voice now, and we have been able to establish even on the other side of Kenya. So we now have two media or video collectives that are working on specific issues of the Maasai community across the border. And lastly is that the PV is helping us to connect with other regions. I've screened our videos in Canada, I've screened in West Africa, I've screened in Northern Africa, and now people know that this is a revolutionary process that can connect people, not necessarily by visiting each other, by sharing electronic information or digital information, that helps to build that courage of uniting.
Nick, I'd actually like to invite you to speak a little bit about participatory video and InsightShare, and then after that, go to Samwel to talk about Pauka, and then to Lara after that to talk a little bit about how the Living Cultures documentary grew out of these three connected things. So Nick, can I come to you first to talk about participatory video?
Yes, hi, thank you, Adrian. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining the webinar. So we've heard quite a bit about participatory video from Sam, which is great. Always rather hear about it directly from our partners who are using it on the ground. And we actually work with Indigenous communities all over the world, have been for 20 years now, training them in participatory video and helping them to establish community media hubs. And now we have a whole generation of Indigenous facilitators, people like Sam and Scholar, who are able to train other Indigenous groups when they're invited to do so, locally and regionally. So in a sense, our kind of aim has been over the last 20 years to try and to decolonize our practice, our approach, by handing over control to Indigenous communities who are now leading this growing movement, if you like, of community media, autonomous media. As Sam mentioned, many Indigenous communities suffer, as we all do, from the onslaught of fake news, often sponsored and generated by the governments from the countries in which they live. This is particularly a problem in Africa, where many Indigenous peoples are not recognized by their governments. And therefore, it's really important that they are able to represent themselves and tell their own stories and counter some of the fake news that in some cases may brand them as backwards or against progress, because they're trying to hold on to their lands and hold on to their traditional way of life. Even called terrorists. And I've seen that happening in Mexico when our Yaqui partners in northwest Mexico are trying to defend their territories from an illegal gas pipeline. So there are all kinds of threats that occur, and it's very important for communities to have a tool with which they can document and share their own stories and perspectives. And also, as Sam mentioned, as a kind of internal process to address conflict, because, you know, this whole colonial approach to divide and rule is still going on, still very strong around the world. By bribing, threatening, abducting, torturing people within communities through fear, they divide communities. And this was the case in Loliondo, the community that Samwel is from, for many years. And when we started working with Sam and his team, this was a big issue, that the community was very much divided around these private hunting safaris, who were paying large amounts of money to bribe various different leaders to support them, when actually the majority of the community was entirely against these private hunting safaris, which were encroaching upon their lands. And so they were able to make a very powerful video in 2015, I think it was, called Alo Show, which I really recommend for all of our audience to watch. It's a fantastically powerful tool, and it was actually shown in the Tanzanian Parliament. It's been shown all over the world at various UN forums. It really helped to broker a kind of new type of discussion with the government. You could say a sort of non-violent discussion, where, because it was such a powerful film, it was mainly the women who spoke out very, very powerfully in this film, and you just can't argue with it. You can see that it's people are speaking straight from the heart, and they're really laying their lives on the line. They say that, you know, they will never give up their land. They will die before they give up their land, and it gave a very clear message to the government. So that's one example of participatory video and how it's been used around the world. Of course, another thing is that many indigenous communities, I think particularly in Africa, from what I've seen, feel very isolated. They don't really realize that there are so many other indigenous communities like them in Africa who are facing many of the same challenges as they are. And so participatory video has been a really excellent way to share, build solidarity, share solutions. And this is something that PALCA, the Pan-African Living Cultures Alliance, I think is really, its purpose is to use participatory video to share this tool and this approach with other indigenous communities who want to use it. Indigenous to indigenous training doesn't involve outsiders, white people coming in and training. It's all about indigenous empowerment. And through that, they can create videos, perhaps from different countries, for example, looking at the problem of conservation, this colonial form of conservation, which is evicting traditional peoples from their lands, rather than recognizing that the very reason why those lands are rich in biodiversity, why they are so valuable and need to be protected, the very reason is because indigenous peoples have been the custodians of those territories. And so to be able to amplify that message by working together as diverse communities, whether they're from the forest regions or the savannas or coastal regions. So that can be another powerful way. I think lastly, as an action research tool, participatory video hands over control and the power and the voice to the wider community. So in the case of the museums, we've heard how many of the artifacts held by museums are incorrect. The narratives are incorrect or completely missing. So we feel that participatory video could play a really important role through this Living Cultures program to enable, for example, the Maasai communities to work perhaps with the youth to go and record narratives on site, showing the artifacts, how they're used in the ceremonies or in daily life, and actually really bring those artifacts to life and tell the stories behind them. And those stories are important, not just because of data and information, not just to help museums improve their knowledge base, but to basically enable this knowledge to be created collaboratively with communities. That's really important. But also to understand the resilience and the incredible struggles that indigenous communities like the Maasai have gone through in order to still be here today, to still exist after so many years of colonization. And that's a really important thing for all of us, for the whole of humankind, when we're facing so many crises, the biodiversity crises, the climate crises, social health crises, we need to listen to those people on the earth who are the most resilient and who know how to survive these crises and have done for hundreds of years. We have to learn from them. And that's very urgent now. So participatory video is again, giving those communities, those custodians, those wisdom keepers, a real platform and a voice.
Sam, I'd like to invite you to talk a bit about Pauka, and just before you do, I'd just like to reiterate to everyone who may have just joined us that this film screening and the Q&A are both free, but your kind donations will go directly to the Pan-African Living Cultures Alliance, which is an international NGO led by and for indigenous peoples of Africa and registered in Kenya. Pauka's mission is to safeguard communities' biocultural rights, support intergenerational transmission, preserve indigenous languages, promote traditional governance of natural resources with participatory video at its heart. You can donate at InsightShare.org/donate, and I'm sure someone will share in the chat that link for you. Samwel, are you able to tell us more about Pauka?
Yeah, thank you so much, Adrian. This is Pauka is a Pan-African Living Culture organization, and we are actually trying to put the culture in the middle of what we're trying to do. We realized that indigenous communities have actually survived all the centuries because their cultures has been resilient, it's been strong, it's been standing, and it is because of their culture that they are also very unique. They have been struggling to maintain land rights, to maintaining their cultural security, to maintain their knowledge, to maintain their schools, because they know if they lose it, their very identity is also lost. So Pauka is a regional, African regional program that we are trying, because we came to realize that even in the museum, there are so many other indigenous communities artifacts, not only from the Maasai community. And for all this time, African indigenous communities have not been united in terms of addressing issues from the African level. So we've been partnering in pieces with other indigenous networks like UGIA, like Cultural Survival, and other organizations that are working to support indigenous communities. But we don't have an African platform where indigenous community meet and also engage their governments and regional bodies on issues that concerns them in different levels. So Pauka is a strategy to bring these communities together. It's a strategy to repair the wounds and come together as people and get to know that we've been fighting the common enemy with our diverse cultures, languages, and ways of doing things. And Pauka will actually is putting the PV as a delivering approach. Because with like 7 years now, we've been able to bring almost, with the Maasai participatory video, we've been able to get so many people coming along with us. People we've been able to share our stories of not only of land right, but also even the culture. The ceremony Amos and the other colleague were talking about, as so many years, people have been coming and documenting it, but they don't actually know what it means. Before the ceremony, the Manyata ceremony, for instance, or a Unoto ceremony, it is preceded by a training, 7 years training in a residential camp where the Maasai community women make the camp, and the elders will use the camp for serious and programmed training of warriors. So the ceremony is actually only marking the end of 8 years of intensive training, intensive knowledge transfer, intensive interaction with elders. And these guys are being prepared to be able to take role forward on cultural issues. So Pauka is actually trying to bring different indigenous people of Africa together. And using the culture and participatory video as an approach, which is non-violent, but also trying to, instead of blaming, PALCA is now coming with a strategy of engaging. We would like to, as much as possible, to engage and letting people know who we are, what we do, and why have we been struggling to maintain our cultures and lands that we use for our livelihood. But also, PALCA, as a strategy, is trying to see bringing the communities that have been suffering from different issues, land right, culture, livelihood, and try to share the stories and try to influence and try to build internal solidarity, as Nick was saying, because PV is very strong, and we see people now that technology is also offering platforms to share a lot of videos. We know the video is not new, but actually the way we use them is new, because it's the community who makes them, community that decides what to be shared with other people. And with our mission or the vision of repairing damages and try to bring a different way of struggling, because we've been struggling with spears, we've been struggling, we've been blaming, but now African indigenous communities have decided to sit down and unite and bring the voice together through the participatory video. Last year, but one, we were in South Africa, and we actually we had the meeting of indigenous communities from 17 countries in Africa. And we made a decision that this is the way to go, because given all the issues, climate change, and all the calamities, indigenous communities are actually suffering most, because they are normally people are deciding on them, that they are not given an opportunity, and given our marginalization history, language is a problem. We need to be able to tell people from our own perspective what issues and how we are affected as indigenous people. So PALCA, we decided to register as an international NGO, and it is going to be the first platform that brings diverse indigenous communities from African continent together, and with a common vision of securing our lands, securing our culture, and influencing decision through participatory video, where we tell our stories and try to bring people to understand, and not colliding with governments, because that has not worked anyway. We have lost so much of our lands and culture, and so many of us are actually in very serious problems. So this is what PALCA is, and with the experiences from the Maasai community, one of the indigenous people in Africa, we have something to start with. And so many people are reading about what we do and how we've established the video collectives and how much we've been able to engage. As we said, we've been able to engage as far as UN. And this is a different way. There have been always Maasai going to the UN conferences, but we wish to come as a people, not to be taken by somebody who has a different understanding of who we are. So we need to bring the issue of representation seriously into discussion, and therefore making our stand very, very strong.
Thank you, Samwel. I'd like to actually go to the next video, Zach, but just prior to doing so, I'm seeing some fantastic questions that are being asked, many of them about the future, and we'll be coming to that soon. And I've got questions lined up from all of the Maasai delegates, so we will be coming back to hear from them, as well as, of course, as hearing from Lara more about the Pitt River Museum and what their role is in all of the negotiations, really, that are going to happen moving forward. Zach, can we please play the next video clip around resistance?
If you try to look, most of the indigenous communities are passing through similar land right problems. The indigenous communities, being a part of pastoralists, Now it is a bit tough for them to have enough because of lack of enough land. For me, a camera is not only a tool, but through a camera, I can see light ahead. Those people who have never gone to class, they are the heroes because now they are speaking their voices, they are speaking the voices of the community, and they are making a difference in the community. Like for example, let us take the issue of Fosero. People have been tortured, others have been killed, the land has been distracted, the bombers have been banned, but through the camera, the voice has been heard, the problem has been seen, and now reaction is being taken. They are solving now the problem because they are seeing that it is real and it is happening. It is not just rumors, but it is something that is real.
Well, seeing as we've just heard Schola speaking there, I'd love to hear from you, Schola, a little bit about climate change and ecology, maybe speaking to what you said in the video, dispelling some misconceptions about Maasai culture and your present day struggles with land rights. Are you still there, Schola? Perhaps actually I also have a question here, or Samwel, are you able to speak to that at all in terms of the resilience of the Maasai, present day struggles with land rights?
Yes, we've been imagining that the Maasais, from the very beginning of colonial coming to Africa, the Maasais have been fighting all along. And I think a lot has been written about the Maasai and the struggles and spearing people, fighting, colliding with governments of Germany, British, and even the post. So I think our culture, if it were not that it's very, very resilient, we could have lost everything, because the Maasai of Tanzania and Kenya have actually lost more than 60% of the land they used to have. And despite the fact that they have lost the land, which is actually the source of everything, the source of knowledge, the source of livelihood, but they have also remained, their culture has remained very intact. They've been struggling to make sure that their culture is not destroyed, because this is what keeps them together. So it is strong because they have a system of maintaining it. As I said, the Unoto, for instance, ceremony is just but the marking of the 8 years intensive training of warriors before they go to the ceremony. So the Maasai have had this very, very systematic system of transferring, maintaining, and putting a lot of sanction to those people who wants to destroy or go away from the culture, and ensuring that everyone go through the rite of passages and ensure that you are fully trained and you feel responsible to keep and maintain your culture. With the issues of climate change and all these changes, the Maasai, part of the marginalization and exclusion has been that the Maasai community have not actually allowed assimilation, allowed interaction, serious interaction with other outside communities. And by maintaining that to stay alone, in history, we read a lot of documents talking about the Maasai were put into reserves by the British colonial government, for instance, because they did not want to change. They did not want people of independent mind, people who wants to stick to their culture, stick to their language, stick to their dressing, stick to, their identity. So our cultures have actually stood a serious test of time. And it is through the culture that we have been also able to maintain our security of livelihood, the pastoralism. We've been able to, if it were not that the land is being taken and squeezed to very dry areas, the Maasai actually could be very independent in terms of economy. because our system is a shared system where we all make sure that we have the livestock, we have the land, we have the water, we have everything. So I think for us, resilience is actually something that we see. If the Maasai could be recognized, if their system will be recognized, and at the policy level, legal level, in our governance, I think we could show the world the way, and maybe we could be the source of inspiration in terms of showing other people how you can really maintain your identity, your culture, your livelihood, your language, which is also having all the knowledge together. So this is what I can say, and my colleague Amos is also here. Maybe he can say something about the resiliency and the culture. But I think for us, we are very, very courageous that we have been facing changes with United Front, and we see changes as they're not very, very good in terms of if you are not able to manage the change, then you can be swept away by change. And we have seen several communities being affected by not being able to maintain the internal system of cultural security and livelihood and language as well.
Thanks, Samwel. And Schola is there now, I believe. Schola, are you able to share with us a bit of your perspective around climate change and ecology, and also maybe a little bit of insight into the work that you've been doing as a filmmaker around the issues that are important to you in your community?
Yeah, concerning the climate change now, it is a bit tough because in a few years, there have been a lot of drought, which has been affecting people, affecting the nature in general. And the Maasai being a very unique community or society, which don't like to be guided by borders. We are both in the two countries, Kenya and Tanzania, and we like freedom of movement, whereby you can move from Kenya to Tanzania without any control. Though we have some governmental guidance or protection or instructions, but in our community, we do like moving from Kenya to Tanzania because of the grazing. We depend on our animals. And for the Maasai to survive, they have to make all means to make sure that their animals are safe and having enough to eat. So if we are not there is not enough for them to eat in Kenya, they have to move to Tanzania. Or on the other side, they have to move to Kenya from Tanzania. So I can say that it is a bit tough because at this moment, during this terrible pandemic of coronavirus, the borders are very strict. There is no movement. You are not allowed to cross the border. There is tight security all over. So it is a bit tough at this moment. But at least from our regions, people are moving from place to place because of their animals. Even if the corona is there, they are still making the grazing for their animals just around the borders, not crossing the borders, but just on the borders to make sure that their animals survive until at least the pandemic is over.
If I could just clarify for people who may have just joined us as well, and for myself, I was ignorant of this until watching the film, that the colonial borders that were put in place split the Maasai communities. Can you explain that a little bit further to us at all?
Yeah, maybe I can join on that. As far as colonial borders and how they have split the Maasai people. You know, we are divided right in the middle, and it really affects, in particular, our leadership system and how we interact as a people. If you try to find out, to follow our ceremonies, as my colleague has put it, we used to come together as a community. We used to spend all that time in training camp. And that has been affected dearly, because even recently, just in, I think it's 2018, 2017, when we have the Manyatas, we have to seek permission to cross the border to Tanzania, and our colleagues have to seek to come there. Something that used to not to happen. So we are really affected by the colonial administration when they divide our land. The other thing, we have been put on reserve. The most high productive zone of our land has been taken. As my colleagues say, 60% of our land has been taken for national.
Hello, Amos, are you still there?
Development projects, which are not really benefiting the pastoral. And just to go back a bit to what he said about the Manyata, there is that aspect of accumulation of knowledge and wisdom and transfer of the same to the new generation. It is something that is connecting us and how that accumulated knowledge and wisdom is transferred. And that is how that knowledge is being shared. So in terms of climate change, the livelihood of our people, which is the pastoralist economy, has been affected. This is in terms of water. We don't have enough water as it used to be. And in that case, I think as a result of this encroachment, where the Maasai people has been put at bay, it caused us to move to areas that are, which were supposed to be reserved. So this is now between us and ourselves as a community. That is the other problem we have. And the other thing which is lacking is the political will. If you try to see the combination of the people in power, sometimes the leadership, the Maasai leadership fail to pass other laws that protect the Maasai people. And also the Maasai governance system has been splitted by the two governments, Tanzanian government and Kenya government. So in my view, the Pan-African living culture is also another way to bring this leadership into place, into being, because the Maasai leadership is what is making our resilience to be seen by many people. That is what keeps us up to this far. And the political will, which is lacking, is what is not respecting that particular kind of leadership. So the traditional leadership under the spearheadship of the Chief Lebon is what we hope to bring into being. And also to connect with the dream of other African communities, which are going through the same struggle.
Thank you, Amos.
Thank you.
It sounds like, and this is actually a question I want to come back to later about decolonizing the international development process, the process of having NGOs, and it sounds like PAUCA is disrupting that process by having indigenous people creating development for themselves. I have a very specific question I'll come back to you about later. However, I did want to take the opportunity to speak to Laura from the Pitt Rivers Museum. I think this is a timely opportunity to bring her perspective into the conversation. I wanted to hear a little bit about Pitt Rivers' involvement in the Living Cultures project as a whole, but revolving around the primary question of why is it important to bring the current struggles and narratives facing Maasai and other indigenous tribes into the present day conversations that museums have, and into your displays, and further, how does that further the work of decolonization?
Thank you, Adrian, for I think it's the way that we got involved in this particular project was very much through Sam's visit, because he was in Oxford, and we had agreed with Nick that we would host an event with several Indigenous leaders who came to Oxford. And because both InsightShare and the Pitt Rivers Museum very much want to sort of foreground Indigenous self-representation, and because the museum wants to work very much towards co-curation and actually also towards redress, and that's how decoloniality is very much part of that process. Because for those who don't know the Pitt Rivers Museum, it's a museum which is really sort of, has existed for over 130 years, and has sort of a very large collection of objects from across the globe. Part of those collections, very much the way that they were accumulated, were part of the process of colonialism and the Project Empire, one could say, where people went out to collect objects, and then those all got accumulated in museums. And so for those museums, and especially Pitt Rivers Museum also is a bit strange because it has kept its Victorian age aura and the way that it displays objects very much in a way that is quite unique in the world, but also it sort of invokes the colonial time very prominently. And so what we've been starting to do more and more is to say, actually, the sort of stories that the museums tell today, how relevant are they if they wouldn't be told by Indigenous communities themselves? How relevant are they if they're not actually telling the stories about these objects that matter to all of us as humans? So I think it's sort of what Amos and Yannick and everybody, all the different delegates very much sort of immediately see when they come to the museum. They walk around and they see, okay, what we see on these labels is the names of the people who collected them, the names, the time that it came into the museum, and maybe something about the resources that they're made of, so the things that they're made of. You don't say anything, about what they were for, the true meaning of these objects. And so when, for example, Amos was standing in front of the fire making case, which is one of these particular cases that is very much about typology. So it shows how the primitive ways of fire making and then more complex ways of fire making. And so it's a case that sort of, when we were standing in front of it, Amos immediately said, oh, well, this looks like one of our fire making tools, but you've got it the wrong way around. You've got it, sort of on display the wrong way around. Plus what's written on it has nothing to do with why we make this fire ceremony, which is really the start of, what Sam and Amos and everybody's already explained. Why we do these ceremonies is to really bring together the community. It's a start of, it's part of a fire making ceremony where all families that are sort of brought together as a society will be lighting their fire on that fire. So there's this whole story which you're not telling. And the same happened with several objects throughout the museum. So I think on the one hand, it's about redress, and we know that we have to redress some of the colonial wrongs that are part of the taking, which sometimes went very much hand in hand with military violence, with looting, things that actually, if we look at our current day philosophy and vision, are very much against what we say we want to be about. We want to be about the many ways of being and many ways of knowing of humans. So in the ways that people make things. So that is one thing. But the other thing is also that if we tell stories that are interesting, people will actually be much more inclined to understand each other much deeper, to find empathy for each other, to actually start understanding how other people live. And then the way that one would want to tell those stories is not through white curatorial voices, but actually through Indigenous voices. And I think that is a very important component of it. But at the same time, and especially also in work that we've done both with the Maasai, but also with people from Amazonia, Haida-Gwaii, the current situation of Indigenous communities is often one of oppression, is one of having to fight for land rights, is having to fight for sovereignty, is having to fight the national governments within which they live. And I think mostly in all the work, because we do more of this sort of work with indigenous communities from across the globe, is what people will say is, please could you stop talking about us as if we live in the past or as if we don't live anymore. We actually have, on the one hand, very important stories to tell and ways of knowing and epistemologies that we would want to share, but also we want to talk for ourselves, which was one of the important things that Sam, I think, in the delegation where Schola was there, they also said when they were talking to our education teams, you know, it's fine that you're sort of wanting to understand and teach about us, but we would like to be the ones who are speaking instead of you talking for us. Because the Maasai and Kenya is part of the national curriculum in the UK, but it's never Maasai themselves who are telling their story. And then I think the other thing is to place people in this sort of past or in a sort of otherness of traditional cultures, places them outside of the contemporary. And so I think it's the sort of placemaking that Sam was talking about, the being part of finding solutions for climate change and for all the different, so also for reconciliation. If there's one society that is divided currently, it's, you know, it's the UK, and Brexit, it shows a lot of that. The same for the US, the way that we're divided around which political parties that we're voting for. So there's all this wide range of topics that one would want to enter into conversations and actually have opinions about. So I think there's just a whole range of elements that one would want to bring into a museum, and make sure that we're not, on the one hand, placing people in a Victorian age, on the other hand, not really telling the story about coloniality and how some of that went hand in hand with a lot of violence. And I think when Le Marron was there, I don't want to talk for too long, but I think when Le Marron was there and he was reading the Enkidu, and Jessica Frankopan was also there and asking, could you tell us a little bit more about how many hands the objects went through before they ended up in the museum? And he started sort of saying which families they had belonged to. Some of them had really been taken as part of, you know, and we personally, just knowing how little information we have from the historical records about how they were taken, about how which families were involved, it was a real revelation to see that knowledge system being brought into the museum, which brought this whole new range of knowledges, which I'm pretty sure visitors would want to know more about too. And on the one hand, it's about knowing more about objects that are not problematic, that are only problematic because of the way that we talk about them. And then there's the other element, which is really about objects that might need to return. And I think that is where I've seen some of the questions also where people would like to know a little bit more. Obviously, Mokombo has now said we want to trace the families, the individual families, and we need to do our work in the UK to try and trace those families. And there's the element that Sam talked about the ceremony being a shared responsibility. And then there's the way that we can learn from reconciliation and restorative justice. And I think that is, all of those elements is what makes contemporary museums relevant. If we bring those conversations into the museum, if we bring those practices into the museum, and it's very much part also, I think, of how research is done today. We don't do it about others, but we do it together. We try to find ways together, and I think that is where Mokombo saying we want this to be a peaceful process. We want us to look for ways to find reconciliation together. So I think that is for us very much the part of finding new understanding, generating new knowledges.
Thank you so much, Laura.
I'll stop talking now. That was a long answer to your question.
It's a wonderful answer, and particularly, I mean, there's so much to be said there. Indigenous curation being something that I think could be the topic of a long session in of itself. I'd like to get Evelyn in on this call, and I wanted to ask you, Evelyn, how was it for you to experience seeing your culture in these museums, particularly in regards to the fact that women themselves are the ones who are the creators of these artifacts? Just trying to give her a second to connect here. Evelyn, can you hear me at the moment?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I was asking what your experience was, what it was like for you seeing your culture, your artifacts in these museums.
My experience at the museums was really sad. I was, because of the artifacts that are and locked in the UK museum. And what makes it sad was number one, the effort and the processes went into collecting those artifacts. We are talking about 100 plus years. And that actual action was not one's job. It was done by a lot of people. And those people had intentions. And I'm speaking for themselves, but just guessing, they had the intention of actually destroying our culture. What's happening right now in many Maasai land has some connection to the artifacts that are sitting in the UK museums. Take, for example, the village that I live in. Most of the villages around us, they have electricity. Ours doesn't have. And when you try to inquire, why don't we have electricity? Or they tell you, you Maasai people, we want electricity. You live far away from here, than maybe a kilometer or so. To me, just answering that, you are denying existence as a Maasai, because if you have livestock, you cannot build a home next to other families' home, because first of all, you have animals, you have the space. So to me, there's a relation of the artifact sitting in the UK and the actual suffering that is going on the ground among many Maasaians in my name.
Thank you, Evelyn. Amos, I had a question for you around what's next. Has there been a plan that's been put in place? Is there any sort of insight you can give us about how the families who lost artifacts, will they be returned to those families? And if so, why? And if there's a process that is about to be undergone whereby that can heal the violence and the injustice of the past. Are there any insights you can give us, Amos?
Amos, you're muted.
He's muted. Are we able to unmute him?
Okay. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. Just to take you back when we returned back from UK, it was around February when the outbreak of the COVID-19 has just started. And we were planning to go for a joint delegation to Mokompo to give the feedback on our trip. It was very unfortunate. There was a lot of lockdown in our country and also in neighboring Tanzania. So we are unable to make that visit. But fortunately, I managed to visit him. And one of the things he said that, according to the feedback from his son, the object requires serious attention and a lot of consultation, including from the cultural advisors from his side. The other thing he say, he wants also to see a full delegation with some coming from Tanzania so that they can give, because when we came out to London, we are all blessed from his home and given direction on what to do. So we are waiting him, but he said that he is still consulting the ancestors and see how we can do, because the wound is so severe that is something that can be done. But in the Maasai setting, he said that their way of bringing peace. And coming on those reconciliation, we have to consider the two families, the family in the Maasai and the families in British, because that is the only way we can have a lasting solution to this matter. So the responsibility is for the museum to try to locate and find out whether they can get trace of the descendant of the family who have been mentioned in this process. And if that is not happening, the museum will take the responsibility of engagement in this process. So I am not giving full report of what we have get from Okompo, because we still have some reservation and he's still consulting the ancestors, but he was really touched about the information he received from his son. Thank you.
Thanks, Amos. And can I ask you, beyond that, I love what, I'll be biased in saying that I love this perspective of the two different families and the fact that this cannot be done one without the other. I wondered, in terms of the space itself, in terms of the museum, in the film you were concerned about how the museum team educate visitors and school children. So in your view, what do you see as might need to happen to ensure that Maasai culture is properly represented in those places, should it be decided that some of the artifacts stay there? Would you have any insight on that? And I'll open that up after you speak, Amos, also maybe to Samwel as well. You might have some insight.
Well, in my feeling, I think the Maasai should tell their own story. And that is having Maasai speak and also try to bridge the gap which are left in the narrative of what is kept in the museum. So that's my feeling, and that's what I told the instructors in the museum, that what is being displayed is not correct about our culture. And it's not good to tell the story wrongly about the people. So I feel that the people should tell their own story. So maybe my brother Samwel can add on that.
Thanks, Samwel. Are you there? Are you on mute? Here, Samwel, we can't hear you at the moment. We're asking you to unmute.
Okay, thank you. There's no doubt that that has been a very difficult point to us to see the artifacts that are only described or sometimes completely missing. And my feeling is, one, we must engage the museum so deeply. We must make sure that our artifacts, our objects are properly described from our own perspective. And I think this is going to change a lot of things. If it happened that all the artifacts from different indigenous communities around the world could be properly represented, it's going to change a lot in the museums, because a lot is missing. But secondly, which is a concern, how much is the museum ready to accommodate all this information? And how much can that going to heal so many wounds, so many historical wounds that have been caused by collection of these artifacts? For instance, for the case of the Maasais, the spiritual family or the spiritual leader has been able to prophetize and tell us about how the artifacts were, the circumstances that the artifacts were taken. And that actually added a lot of pain to the wounds, because we trust so much our spiritual system. We know they can't lie because we've been using it for centuries. So now talking about this artifact was taken and the owner was killed on a very serious, so that is adding a lot of painfulness to the not only to the masses, but also how is the museum taking such information, which could also be so much serious in terms of it has been left in the museums, and now that you need to improve and putting a lot of information. Is there space for that? So our feeling is we must represent ourselves properly, and whatever the information, whether painful, that has to feature, because we can only address the current issues if we understand and appreciate the history.
Thank you, Samwel. This actually leads into one of the questions which has come in from our audience. I've been trying to weave your questions, you may have noticed, into some of my own as they've lined up. So I hope that I've been reaching your questions. Of course, please repost things if you feel there's a key question as an audience member that you really want to hear. I'm actually going to a question from Jasvinder, who asks, what is the museum and Maasai view on the story being told on how these artifacts are acquired at the museum? Some of the instances of theft and murder clearly illustrate the injustices of colonialism. Does this story also need be told, or is this something that will be resolved in the ceremonies? That's directed to you, Lara.
Yes, so let me just go back to which question that was.
It's from Jasvinder.
Yeah, so I think it's the whether we should also talk more about the colonial process of taking. Yes, absolutely. I think that is very much the sort of work that museums are doing. The Pitt Rivers Museum, including, is doing that sort of work and being much more honest about sort of truth-telling with regards to the colonial process of taking. But I think it should go further than that, where it's not just about sort of acknowledging the difficulties and sort of self-flagellation, which is certainly also necessary. But I think one of the things that we can do is to actually make sure that where reconciliation needs to happen in ways that it's culturally appropriate, like Mokombo has been advising us to actually also try and go beyond just, you know, putting on a label that this object was taken as part of military violence is not enough. So I think that is where it just really depends from object to object. So on the one hand, there are those objects that might need to return, although, which I think Amos already spoke about earlier. One of Mokombo's major concerns has been that if we don't do this right, and we don't do it through a peaceful process where we're really working alongside each other, this would actually open up old wounds. It might cause a lot of trouble, which we know has happened in the past with, and in the present actually, with objects being returned very recently to Kenya still, where objects have suddenly become objects of interest for collectors instead of objects that could be returned to communities. So I think it really is quite a difficult process where we just need to make sure that we're getting it right. And I think that is why we're taking the time also. I know that people are quite, at least in a lot of the things that people will ask me or museums in general, and also the chanting that we've seen in front of museums about giving things back. It sometimes feels a bit as if there's an easy resolution to it. While, for example, in the Maasai case, it's not difficult to send 5 objects back, especially because these objects are quite small objects. They're not hugely difficult to transport. But if we want to do it right and actually do a reconciliation process where we are not making more trouble for Maasai communities, but actually being part of a process of redress, then we need to go beyond just returning the objects, but looking at the ways that we're returning them. So I think that is where, then the other question that I think Sam asked, and somebody also said, I think it was the same person asking, could you answer that question? How ready are we? I think for the Pitt Rivers Museum, we are ready, and I think we've been doing quite a bit of this sort of work, and we will continue to do that kind of work. I don't know if that goes for all museums, but I think there are certainly in the UK, but also in the EU, more and more museums who are ready to engage in these processes. Obviously, museums are slow-moving machines, and they are very set in their ways of doing things. And I think that is something that requires a continued investment. It also depends very much on the sort of people that are working in the museums, the individuals that are working in the museums. And I think that is where it's our task to, as individuals who work in museums, to also talk to each other and influence each other's ways of working. So I think that is going to be a continuous challenge. I think one of the things that remains, though, is that in museums we tend to work through objects, and we tend to work through putting things on display, and that is not necessarily the only thing that indigenous communities would want to see happening more and more of. It's also not the thing that people would want them to go to a museum when they're going back, which sometimes is a tendency for people to think, just send them back to other museums. Many of these objects would not go into a museum. They don't, that is not their sort of intended use or intended life. So I think that is where museums also maybe need to rethink what care looks like. Museums think of care as preservation care and museum care. Well, actually, if we want to care for objects, especially those objects that aren't just things, but are actually often either the ancestors themselves have a sacred way of being, are sacred, are people, one could say, or are beings that they would not want to be put in a case. They do not want to be preserved in the ways that we would preserve them. So we need to really rethink care, rethink what label writing looks like. Does it need to be a label? I think Tricia has been saying maybe you could have films instead of labels. Maybe you could have people talking about objects. And I think those are all possibilities. And that is why co-curation can be a really interesting tool. It won't always be a possibility. Some people won't want to work with museums because museums are tools of oppression. So I think it really is this is not a very concrete answer, but I think it's an honest answer.
Thank you so much, Laura. Yeah, the rethinking care, that sounds like another panel discussion in of itself as well. Thank you so much for sharing honestly. I actually have a question here from Tricia, and this is for the Maasai delegation, from Sam, Scholar, Evelyn, Amos, whoever wants to speak to it. And the question that Tricia has posed is, would you want to see your stories, not just about the objects, but also about life in the now, represented through participatory videos that can be in the museum space? Of course, this participatory videos would be made through your collectives, but would you want to see those participatory videos in the museum space? And I'm putting that out there to whoever would like to speak to that from the Maasai delegation. Samwel, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, maybe, yes, we would like these stories to be in the museums. but I think we have to go beyond that, because in fact, we are not saying we want to help the museum to have the correct information. We are saying we would like to engage the museum to understand what actually all the objects they hold means to us, previously, now, and in the future. And why I said if the museums are opening up enough to accommodate a lot of information around the objects and what it means, it is because most of the artifacts that are in the museums are also being used now in Maasai community. And the processes or the circumstances or issues that caused the people to lose some of these things were actually conflicts around people defending land, people defending cows, people defending their cultures. So I think we would like the museum, one, to accept change to most of the information related in their catalogs. Two, to understand the historical and current situation that we are still struggling up to now as indigenous communities. But thirdly, is museum actually becoming something bigger than the store, just to keep things, but also to be able to let those voices go to other people who might be interested to know and understand the situation of indigenous people. So in this case, for the case of Palka and Kenya and Tanzania, we are looking forward to establish partnership that is really going to help us. Museums becoming a place where, if we go to the museum, sometimes we have to celebrate, because these are spaces where they are properly decolonized, and the voices are really representing previous and current and the future aspirations of the indigenous community. And not like going to the museum and start crying because you see a lot of misinformation, a lot of gaps. And sometimes, as Laura said, museums are very slow because they are big machines, a lot of collections. If you are to do labeling or maybe to improve the narratives of all the artifacts, you must invest a lot of time and resources and people, because they are not, they're quite big collections in the museum. So I think for us, we would like to feature prominently in the information that is related to our artifacts, but we would like also the museum to create that space and become a partner and not a prison of our cultures and knowledges and the pains.
Become a partner and not a prison. Thank you, Samwel, for those words. I have another question here from Anita, and I'm going to be aware of the time here. It's about 9 minutes to the hour here, but we'll keep going as long as we can. As long as there are questions, hopefully we can stay on. The question from Anita that we have is, could museums who don't intend to return objects rent them from original communities like they do from Western museums? I guess that's for you, Lara.
So I think it can't be either or. I think you can't just sort of decide, I'm not going to give it back to you even though it's sacred, but I'll give you some money. So I think that is where, if a process of decoloniality means that you have to flip the power balance. The colonial processes were about taking other people's power away and disempowering communities that weren't white privileged European. And I think that is where, in a process of, it is absolutely possible that a community decides, you know what, if you really want to have those objects in your museum, then we don't mind if you transfer the ownership to us, but we would need you to then start paying a loan fee, for example. That is a possibility. I think it's something, you know, that might be possible for, especially for some of the national museums. I think for the Pitt Rivers Museum, because we don't charge anybody who comes into the museum, we would not be able to pay loan fees. So it would be quite simple that we would return objects instead of paying loan fees, because we don't gain anything from having a museum. We gain no money there. We have deficits each year. So I think it's sort of, but I do understand how, and mostly for the sort of ethnographic collections, there's hardly any loan fees that ever are paid apart from, so it's not like with a Rembrandt yet. It might change. I don't know how it's going to develop in the future, but I do think that you can't, the decision should not be about these sorts of objects, because for example, with the delegates who came in 2018, where Schola and Sam were there, they identified from the 88 objects that they looked at, they said 5 of them were really problematic. Those were the ones that they would want to see return possibly, or at least they would need more advice from Mokombo, they would need more advice from traditional leaders, they would need more advice from the community. And that is the whole process has been about those objects in part. The other part is about the narratives that are told in the museum about objects that are not necessarily sacred and need to be returned because they should never have ended up in the museum, but they are about the narratives that are being told about those. So those are not necessarily about sort of loan fees being paid for them, but actually about doing justice to the story. And I think that is where the collaboration sort of starts working. But then when we, in 2020, there was a whole range of things that, you know, Sam and others had sort of brought together a number of things where they would like to see the partnership leading to. And I think part of that is very much the work of NGOs like InsightShare and others who could help with those things, you know, being set up and working. Other parts are things that the museum can try and see if we can do that either through our networks or through our own expertise. So it's about building a set of possible outcomes of a partnership. And I think those, which has been quite nice to be able to work together alongside each other, has been to be able to sort of move beyond trying to find an easy solution. At the same time, for the Pitt Rivers Museum, with, you know, it's a small team that works in the museum, but it has a huge collection. And I know that Yannick, when he was talking about some of these issues, and we were talking about the reconciliation, the possible reconciliation ceremony we need to do, and Yannick said, I do feel a bit sorry for you guys, because he was looking around the museum, and he said, we have about 100,000 objects on display, and he said, you've taken all these things from so many people, and if you have to do all this work with all of them, you're going to have a long trajectory ahead of you. And he was so right, because, you know, it's still, and I know Viba is here who's been doing work with the Naga, and there's other people here who've seen some of the other work that we've done, like Zoe, who's a filmmaker, and she's, you know, seen the work that we do with people from South Sudan and people from the Sound from South Africa, and with the Haida, and so that is absolutely true, and I don't think we need to be naive in thinking that we are going to change the world from this one small institution, but I think we need to be part of that process of change.
Thank you so much, Lara. I've got our next question here, which is from Amy from Cornwall, who would like to know what's next for the Living Cultures Project. I'm not sure who's best placed to answer this. Perhaps Nick, would you be able to sort of give us an intro and then move over to the Maasai delegation? Could that be a way of doing it?
Yes, I'll give it a go. I think it's quite a difficult question to answer at the moment because of the COVID-19 situation and the lockdowns and all over the world. That as Amos was explaining earlier, the delegation hasn't yet managed to go back to Mokombo as a delegation and to have the official response, if you like, from him and his son. Amos has been back. He managed to get back a few weeks ago to show the documentary and talk through what had happened, and recorded that message that we showed earlier in the webinar, where Mokombo was speaking about the need for peaceful resolution and a need to involve the families who lost the items that have been traced and tracked down through the sacred gourd and the ceremony with speaking to the ancestors. So those families I don't know if they've been contacted yet, but probably not because of the difficulty for traveling around at the moment in that part of the world. Then a lot of research needs to be done at this side to try to find out more about the collectors, the people who actually collected these items, the various people that handled them before they got to the museum. Some of them have been in the museum for over 100 years. So, and the information that we were looking at, our colleague Jessica was doing a lot of research in libraries across the country, and it was quite difficult to piece together what really happened. There's a lack of information on this side about the collectors, a lack of diaries, lack of factual information. But I think it would be great if we can trace those families. But also, it feels to me from hearing a bit more about the Maasai traditional reconciliation process that it's not so much a question of individuals. It seems like it has to go beyond the individuals who are involved. It's the reconciliation process. The way the Maasai do it is on a clan level. So it's a sort of a communal responsibility, and I think that's something that would be really interesting to look at. What is our collective responsibility here in Britain? Many of us who have ancestors who worked in the colonial, as colonial officers in the empire. I mean, in Oxford, where I'm based and Laura's based, and the Pitt Rivers Museum is based, is of course, it's kind of the HQ really of the British Empire. This was the intellectual headquarters. It was where the whole intellectual justification for the empire came from. The whole concept of white supremacy. We went to visit the Bodleian Library with the Maasai when they came in 2018, and we looked at maps, the original maps that were drawn up by the colonial administration when they stole the Maasai's land. We saw the original paperwork that documented the 12 Maasai elders that signed away the most rich land that they had, the Masai Mara Game Reserve, with X's, crosses. It's likely that they couldn't even read what they were signing. So, all of that stuff is right here where we live in Oxford. So I think it's wonderful that we're doing this project here, and in Cambridge as well. Of course, it would be the other place that had a very important role to play in training the colonial officers that went out around the world and carried out these policies that indigenous peoples are still suffering from now. So it's a chance to take stock of the past, I think, and I hope that will be part of the next steps. We're looking for guidance from the Maasai's spiritual leader, the Mokombo, who's adamant that he wants to see this resolution happening in his lifetime under his watch. And so that's really that's key, because he's an elderly man now. He has also said that he's invited us and the museum senior staff to Kenya to meet him, visit him. So that could be one of the next steps next year if we're able to travel there with a delegation from the UK. Perhaps we can include some of the families, ancestors of people that collected some of the items, who knows. I think there's a lot of work to be done once the Maasai Video Collective are able to travel more freely and organize workshops, participatory video workshops. There's a lot of work to be done in documenting the use of these artifacts, these objects in everyday use, and the importance and relevance, and so that they can create the narratives that go into museums, and the stories and the contemporary stories. Yeah, I think that's probably enough for now. Just while I'm speaking, I would just like to acknowledge Zoe Broughton, who's on the call, on the webinar as well. She's joined us. It's really good to see you, Zoe. And Zoe was the incredible filmmaker who followed us and got this incredible footage, kind of fly on the wall kind of style. We never knew from 1 hour to the next what was going to happen. and it was impossible to plan this movie. So Zoe was able to, she was working day and night tirelessly to just capture everything. And then the editing process was also really challenging. So we're really grateful to you, Zoe. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for that, Nick. I'd actually like to now hear from each one of the Maasai delegation about two questions, really. One about your upcoming projects with participatory video and what living cultures mean to you. I'd like to put this forward first to, who have we not heard from? Schola, can we hear from you first about these two questions? Firstly, what are your upcoming projects that you're working on with participatory video, and what does living cultures mean to you?
Yeah, I think living cultures mean everything to us, because if we talk about living cultures, this is something that is still happening in us at the moment. And concerning the upcoming projects, I think at the moment we are doing some, we are trying to make or to expand the Palka movement, which will bring together all the indigenous communities together as an umbrella to make their voices to be heard and to be answered through the PV or the camera, which is the most important equipment that we are practicing to use at the moment, or other people are already using, and also to expand our movement to other people who don't know what is going on or who have not yet joined the PACA, to come in and make their voices being heard worldwide.
Thank you, Schola. And Evelyn, I'm going to come to you now with the very same question about, and I know that you're a feminist and an activist in your community. What is your upcoming project with participatory video, and what does living culture mean to you? Hi, Evelyn, we can hear you. If you can, do you need me to repeat my question? I fear there's a bit of a delay there.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So Evelyn, I'm asking about what are your upcoming projects with participatory video? I'll accept it first.
Upcoming projects, you said?
Yes, exactly.
I have a lot, but number one, I'm trying to address the issue of water. We live, or where most of the Maasai live, normally are the low drylands that have water only from the rainy season, which is normally from November to March or early April. Then the rest of the year is really dry. So what I'm working on is trying to find ways to get underground water so that people and the livestock can drink. That is number one. And for that, we are pumping the water using diesel generator times, all the solar systems. Sometimes we run both. And that is the first project. Another project to work on is milk, which is organizing Maasai women so that they can come together, collect the milk, and then process the milk and sell to our customers around. So forming different collection points or hubs that the milk can be collected, processed, and then be sold. The third point is projects that can help the Maasai keep the animals, but at the same time making a living. That is bringing animals drought resistant or crossbreeding animals like the local breeds and maybe Fijian or other exotic at least can produce milk, because the dry season milk usually drops to maybe half a liter to 1 liter per cow, but when you do high breeding, at least you get more liters per cow. So those are some of the projects. I have a lot, but those are some.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's great to hear from you. Next, can we come to you, Amos, to ask you the same question about what do you have next? What's your next project with participatory video, and what does living cultures mean to you? I can't hear you yet, Amos. One second, I think we're waiting for you to unmute.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, you say our story about participatory video, our next project is to start bringing indigenous people together to learn participatory video and voice out their struggle in terms of land, in terms of their culture, in terms of their languages, protection, and all that entail to them, and also to tell their story in their own language. So our focus now is to start looking forward to the indigenous people of Africa. In terms of Palka, what Palka meant to me is a solidarity movement for indigenous people to speak about their culture and to speak about what their contemporary struggles. This is a movement that will bring them together and share their story and provide solutions. As my brother Sam said in the beginning of the conversation, that Palka aim is to connect dream. Palka aim is to give solution to what we are going through, and also to address in a peaceful manner what the community are going through. The other thing is governance of cultural system. Culture should bring the system in place so that the hidden reality is bring on the table. So that's our focus as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amos. And Samwel, can I hear from you on the very same question about your?
Thank you. For me, what next? What are we doing now with the PV? In Tanzania, we have two ongoing projects. One is we are documenting a traditional land use and value and cultural value mapping. In my vicinity, in my village, we have a community forest where we are documenting invisible or non-dominant uses of, like in Tanzania, for instance, they're talking about that the government is promoting land uses. So when they only promote what is visible, I mean the grazing, the maybe farming, forest conservation, but the invisible part of it, which is connected to our culture, is not normally recognized. So for us, we are trying to bring that into to the service. We want to bring it into perspective. And we started a project of documenting traditional land uses and cultural value by using the Maasai traditional leaders and elders to map and to show how they have been managing the forest and what are the cultural values that we have to maintain. And that has been central part of the conservation and sustainability of the forest. So this is one project we are doing. And another project is also, we are doing SDG in my language, Sustainable Development Goals. We're trying to see, this is a global development roadmap, which is very much loaded, and indigenous communities, even the local communities, even the other mainstream societies in Tanzania do not exactly understand what it means, how they should participate in monitoring, planning, plus all the 169 in, targets. Is a very complex document. So we've been trying to, one is to unpack it, but also making it relevant to our situation. And unfortunately, we've got to learn that SDGs as a process and a declaration is not actually working very closely with UN RIP, unfortunately, because there's nothing talking about the indigenous land right and so forth. They're talking about land as a whole. So this is another thing we've started recently. And we started by like translating SDGs. Somebody, I was talking with others and they said, we were trying to say, what does universe mean to the Maasai? What does it mean? And somebody said, it is, I'm sure Amos will be very happy to hear. They said, universe means cell in Maasai language. So we are trying to see how we can unpack it, but also given the banner of leaving no one behind, we the Maasai indigenous people have an opportunity to come in and bring the wisdom and bring the resiliency and talking about sustainability from our resiliency and from our culture. So this is two projects that we are working on. And also what living culture means to me. It means being a self-determination. It means deciding on my own, maintaining what I've chosen, the life I've chosen to live in, and maintaining it, whatever the cost, because it's part and parcel of my identity. And so it actually means me, myself. And I think this is how I can describe.
Thank you so much, Samwel. I see, I'm just reading through the comments here before we wrap up. Laura, did you want to reach out to someone, to Juliana?
Yes, I just wanted to say hello to Juliana because I can see that she's here. And it was just really nice to see you, Juliana. I always, because there's a queen in the Netherlands that's called Juliana. So for me, Juliana was always Queen Juliana.
Yes.
So it's very good to see you. Thank you for dialing in, Juliana.
It's lovely. So Juliana was part of the delegation and she was in the film as well. People might recognize her. It was such an important and wonderful part of the delegation. So it's so lovely that you joined us tonight. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, in closing, firstly, I'd like to thank all of you who have joined us today. Of course, particularly, I'd like to thank all of our guests, Schola, Samwel, Evelyn, Amos, Nick, Laura. Thank you so much for contributing to this such an important topic. I'd also like to thank Zoe Broughton, the filmmaker who made the documentary, is on the call. We'd like to thank the Staples Trust, and in particular Jessica Fankopan, for her support with doing archival research and being part of the project. If you haven't already, please donate to PALCA, the Pan-African Living Cultures Alliance. It's available to do so at insightshare.org/donate. For any of you who are wondering where to find this Q&A later, it will be archived on the InsightShare YouTube channel, the Medicine Festival website and Facebook page, and also the Pitt Rivers Museum website. Thank you so much for joining us. And if there's not anything else from delegation, then that's bye for now. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Adrian. What a wonderful job. Really, really wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone.
My honor.
Great. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.